Sam and I are out doing some scouting today, and the weather's like perfect, 50 to 60 degrees. Still a little bit of snow here, which was a bit surprising, but that'll at least allow us to see most of what we want to see today. I'd say over the next week or so, the rest of the snow is going to melt, and there'll be, continued ideal scouting conditions. But this place is a little bit more open terrain than what we hunted last year, and so we're basically just trying to, focus on the area that has the most habitat diversity and the thickest cover around. And we're kind of ignore a lot of the more open timber type stuff.
Generally, they're all going to come down here to get water, slower.
So this spot's kind of intriguing for like a early November time frame. We got a bigger creek that kind of winds throughout here, and it curves into the woods here. So it's nice and thick and brushy down there, and some of that brush is extending a little bit onto the slow ground. But then you got a couple trails that kind of hook around the outside of this creek. And then if you see behind me here, we got this multi-trunk, a little bit larger tree, and there's a little offshoot of that creek that just comes out a little bit. So from an access standpoint, if you had a wind that generally was blowing either out toward the creek or even kind of quartering that direction, we could access from the creek with like a kayak, pick it up right on the shore there, and then just kind of wade through the couple inches of water here, pop right up into that multi-trunk tree, and have a really solid, almost kind of like a bulletproof setup where as long as the deer aren't coming from the other side of the creek, you'd be pretty golden from a scent perspective. And some of the deer that might be cruising through this bigger woods area, they get through this pinch point, and you have a pretty good opportunity at them from that tree. We just walked this little thicker kind of oxbow-like area in this creek drainage, and really not a ton of deer sign here. So what that probably indicates is that some of these deer might be, instead of bedding down here low by the creek, some of them might be bedded up higher on some of these little minor ridges and stuff near some of the clear cut areas where they could use more of a visual type of bedding. But we'll keep walking. We'll walk kind of a combination going from low ground to high ground and everywhere in between, just trying to hit all these edges and see where we end up finding the most deer sign. So we finally found our first tree stand, and we've walked quite a bit, so to only find one this far is not too bad of a sign. We were just talking about how you could, once again, in this type of a spot, access up from the water and pop up on this hill where we got just a little bit of a pinch point between like a swampy depression there. And that's where we ended up seeing this stand. So tough to say for sure if this guy is accessing here from public or private, if he's coming in from the water, or if he's just walking in. So we'll keep an open mind, all that kind of stuff. Just came up on the second stand, up in those trees right there. This one, once again, tucked into a little pinch point between the creek and a little swampy depression. And just generally so far, we haven't really seen a large concentration of deer sign. Yeah, there's tracks and stuff and droppings, but really not a lot of rubs, not a lot of fresh rubs from last year. Hardly any scrapes, like one or two small ones that we've seen so far. So we're kind of contemplating at this point whether or not we just want to kind of cut our losses in this area and just head back to the truck and go drive and check out another spot. It's kind of what I'm leaning towards. If this area had a lot of potential, I would have seen more buck sign and a higher concentration of it thus far with the amount of ground that we've covered. Just came up on another stand here, another big ladder stand chained to the tree that I'd say, just based on the chain, it looks like it was tended, fairly recently. There's definitely a lot better places than the place that we're at right now. So yeah, we're just gonna pretty much beeline it back to the truck and drive to a different spot. Maybe. Well, we're almost 2 miles into our second location here, and this one does seem to have a lot more deer sign, just in general, a lot more droppings, a lot more tracks. What I didn't realize just by looking at the map is that a lot of these areas have been logged fairly recently, like the last couple of years, don't quite show up on the maps yet. So some of the areas that look like they were wooded are actually clear cut, and a lot of the areas that we're looking at, and these little pinch points especially, between like little swamps and lakes and stuff, have paths going through them, like the trucks or whatever just went through some of these areas, and it's actually pretty easy to navigate, which I was thinking might not be the case. So we haven't seen a lot of rut sign, and really that's kind of one of the main things we're looking for is, you know, bigger scrapes, rub lines, you know, things that would indicate that it could be good late October into early November, because that's where I really feel the most confident hunting this type of terrain. Yeah, there's a lot of droppings up in here. Yeah, it's just surprising that there's not that many rubs.
Like, if they're walking through here, it's just like a trail. I don't feel like
Yeah, I mean, this is like an early November type area where you might not see the sign necessarily, but bucks are still going to cruise this.
right.
Just
well,
because
it's
of,
a good pinch.
yeah, it's a good pinch point between two little ponds. Got one over there and then one over there. We've gone back in here quite a good ways, and while there's definitely deer sign, deer use this for sure, a lot of droppings. For whatever reason, there's not a lot of rut sign from last year. We're seeing a fair number of rubs, but they're all old. So it's possible that some of like the same logging activity and stuff, you know, as it changes the woods, that could change some of these historical patterns where we see historical rut sign, but not last year's rut sign, and maybe they're, you know, shifting slightly different during that time of year, and we'd really like to find out what's kind of the most recent. So we'll keep walking until we find stuff that looks like it's from last year. So as you can probably tell, we're running a little bit low on light. And I think by the time we get back to the truck at this spot, it probably will be pretty dark. So we'll probably cap it off for this day. And we found some stuff that was pretty good. I think that first spot that we found was a good pinch point during the rut that you could certainly set up on. Good access, good setup there. This place here, I think it has some potential. I think we haven't found the best of the best, but after today we got a pretty good idea of which loop we'd want to do next. Back out today, just scouring some more ground that we didn't get time to touch last time. This area, in comparison to the last place we went, there's not as many tight little pinch points and things like that, but the cover in general is a little bit more dense. I think there's probably a higher likelihood that we'll see some more good deer sign, but it might not be as condensed as what we tried to look at the other day. All the stuff that I'm walking through is brand new. Stuff we hunted last year is probably still going to be decent, but always good, I think, to have a lot of backup options. I'm really just trying to bank as many spots this time of year as possible, so that throughout the summer I can kind of narrow them down leading up to the season. And even during the season, if I need to change from one place to another based on hunting pressure or whatever, I can do that. Finally just found this first spot here that I'm pretty excited about, and I'm out here, you know, primarily looking for a lot of like late October, early November type stuff. But what I found here, I think, is more of a bed to feed type area, where this appears to be where a buck is bedding at least some point throughout the year. And right in this big thick evergreen right here, that's where the bed is. I found one white hair in there. So I don't think he's been using it super recently, but this is right on the edge of a swampy area. You can see out behind me how open it is. In addition to the hair, there's also droppings leading up this little point that, you know, sticks out into the swamp. And there's also a rub from last year right in this vicinity too. So I'll dig around a little bit just to see if I can't find any more clues. And the next step will be to pick a tree that I can get away with potentially setting up on this deer if he's in this location. He can see clear out there to where it'd be really tough to get set up within, say, 60 yards of this deer if he's able to bed facing that direction. But if there's one area that's better, it would be further to the left side. To the right, it's more open. But over this direction, if there's a tree, that'd be ideal. Some of the tine marks up here are pretty high. So there's not really a lot of good setup trees between here and that bed. I'm probably standing maybe 80 yards total distance, but I can't even see halfway to it from where I'm standing. But what that means is that this first white oak here, there's another one right there, early season, if the deer's bedded there, and if these oak trees would be dropping acorns, they could be totally fine setup trees where this deer could come to the, I mean, it's still pretty secluded here. He could get to these easily before last light. And I know I could get here and set up undetected, so I'm thinking that'd probably be the safest option for hunting this, getting close enough without spooking the deer, but still having a reasonable opportunity. Just finally, for the first time, I got down in this area, found a couple fresh rubs, kicked a deer out of this little bottom area that was bedding, and finally found the first scrape. And it looks like a pretty obvious one in a good, secure location. I mean, it's not huge, but you can see how pretty much you have maybe half a car hood size that's kicked up. But the licking branch looks to be pretty well used. We got basically a couple different stems that come down and really branch into a whole lot of smaller branches, and that, whenever I found those last year, that seemed like the type of licking branches that these deer really liked, and they hit those scrapes pretty often. Finally found my first tree stand after several hours of walking around. So from the looks of this stand, I mean, everything about it really strikes me as a rifle hunting stand. Big ladder stand, shooting rail. You can see a pretty good ways out from where this guy's at. There's a cell cam sitting there. So I think it still gets actively used, but it might be mostly a gun hunter. And this is also the type of setup where if this were a bow hunting stand, I wouldn't really feel too worried about it, just for the standpoint that, you know, these type of spots, if they got hunted perpetually over and over again, they're not going to be good spots. At least not probably what the guy's hoping for. Whereas some of the stuff around this that I found, some more scrapes and rubs and good pinch points and things like that I could get in, easy out, and maybe only hunt them once or twice a year. That's kind of the stuff that I'm a little bit more interested in. So when I find this kind of stuff, you know, I take a waypoint, take note, and then I kind of think about big picture, how the deer might be using something that's more permanent like this and adjusting their travel patterns accordingly. Another tree stand in this tree, screw-in steps, and this one appears to be quite a bit older. That frame is showing some rust, everything's all tattered and worn on it. I'm guessing that stand was placed long before some of this timber started to fall down, when it was a lot more open. Hard to say if that stand even gets used anymore. I'm liking the looks of this spot for a late October setup. As I was getting into the spot, I'm sure you can see how it's a little bit thicker behind me here. There's even some deadfall back there, and as I was coming along through here, there was really only one trail I could even walk because it was so thick. And it's just staying on that trail and was kind of worn into the dirt just because of how narrow it was. And finally I could start to see it open up a little bit, and it's kind of right where you have, you know, two thicker ridges, and I'm crossing between one and the other. So in the middle, there's, you know, just kind of a natural little inside corner there. But then also it's just a little bit more open where I'm standing, and there's a big old scrape right here. Good licking branch over the top. And access to this spot from a direction adjacent to where I just walked into here would actually not be too bad. And for the predominant wind directions, at least a couple of them, getting in here wouldn't be too bad. Oh, I can see another scrape over there, fresh rub. Yeah, I'm liking this spot a lot. Really, I think at this point now, it just comes down to picking the right tree to where I can come in from that direction and then be able to get up into a tree, preferably right in some of this thick cover where I never have to walk on a deer trail. Now this licking branch has got a little different look to it. This one, you can see all these edges of these licking branches are chewed off here, but they're a little bit unlike that other licking branch where it just kind of had like a spider web of little twigs hanging down. But I mean, certainly this is a spot that is gonna see, I think, a lot of activity. You can see acorn caps in here too. There's a couple of white oaks. There's one over there. So this might be one of those spots where maybe I even just kind of monitor this one early season too, because I mean, even if the deer aren't pawing up the scrapes, they'll still come and check these licking branches early in the season if they happen to be in the area. They still use them as communication hubs. And right here in the same spot, we got a third little scrape. This one doesn't look as pawed up as the other ones, but depending on when the time of the year was that all these leaves dropped, I mean, that could affect the leaf cover look on the scrape. But you can tell this one too, again, if I can get the camera to focus, this one's got just kind of that broken off limb that hangs down, and we got just a spider web of little limbs, little twigs that hang off of this licking branch. This big tree right here could work. It's a little bit open. I'd like a tree that gives me a little bit more back cover if possible. This tree right here has some potential too. Of course, this tree right to the left of it is kind of a similar story. That one again gives me good back cover, and it's right on the edge of the thick. So if I were to access that tree specifically, I could kind of work right down this little thick edge, maximize the chances that I don't actually walk over any of these deer trails, and potentially might even get a couple hunts out of a spot like this. I'm on the back side of those scrapes, and you can see as the trail kind of cuts in here to the swamp, we got another scrape right here. And in the place I hunted last year, it seemed like generally where you found a good primary scrape area, there's always like a cluster of scrapes and just a cluster of deer sign. It wasn't like there's ever just like, you know, the Dead Sea and all of a sudden you got one big giant scrape. There's always kind of a good congregation of deer sign around heavy cover, and especially in between what looks like could be possible bedding areas. So like this stuff all in front of me and to the sides is super thick, plenty of places where deer could bed. And so I think that spot back there, I mean, it's probably, you know, the closest spot between, you know, overlapping bedding areas, and that's where those deer are communicating and leaving some of their sign via scent. About time. This is actually my first one of the year. It seems like every time I come out to a place like this, I can always envision sheds just being like anywhere, like, oh, there could be a shed there, could be a shed there. But the reality is these deer, I don't think they're as concentrated, you know, nearly as much as they are in farm type country late season. When there's still snow on the ground, you can see just how far these deer and how much they wander through these types of areas. And I've found them in beds, and I found them just kind of randomly, like this one is just kind of randomly on a trail. So it makes me wonder, number one, how many sheds I walk past walking through terrain like this. And then just number two, it kind of puts into perspective like how rare it is to actually find one in an area like this. I definitely don't find a lot of them, that's for sure. I'll probably come back out here maybe one or two more times to scout some additional stuff. Then we'll go back to some of the places we hunted last year and just kind of recheck those spots. and then start scouting and turkey hunting places like, more hill country type stuff. So definitely a pretty busy spring.